So our first speaker in the Northeast session is Kate Mulvaney. Kate Mulvaney is a social scientist at the U.S. EPA Office of Research and Development. Kate's work has focused on understanding the use of various management practices for meeting water quality goals, what influences people's water quality perceptions, sense of place, and human considerations in marsh migration. Kate, take it away.
You can see it okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. That was a long introduction. So I'm Kate. I work at the US EPA's Research Lab in Narragansett. The work today is really a collaboration of a number of folks. So Kathy, who just spoke, Susie Avasian, they're both both ecologists that work in our lab as well. Katie Canfield is a postdoc social scientist that works at our EPA lab. And then we've been really fortunate to also work on this with Caitlin Chafee and Mary Scholl, who are now both based at the Narragansett Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. And so kind of a cross-disciplinary of both social scientists and biophysical scientists, as well as practitioners on this project. A quick overview. I'll give just a little bit of background on the why for some of this work. What I'm trying to do is set some of the stage for the social side of restoration. I'm going to talk and provide the skeleton for two case studies that we use to develop the SESAME framework that I'll go into a lot of information on and provide some specific insights from those case studies as to how we built the framework, and then some takeaways at the end. So when we're talking about the social side of marsh resilience or climate adaptation, we're really talking about people have caused these problems, but also who are going to need to fix them. And that holds true for all coastal adaptation efforts as well, that we're going to be able to enable them, and we also have the capacity to stand in their way. And you know, the inclusion of thinking about stakeholders and partnership isn't new in coastal restoration and climate adaptation efforts, but we haven't done such a great job of is capturing lessons learned. So what's working from a social side of these marsh projects? Or restoration or resilience projects, and what can we be doing better? The two projects that I'll be talking about today, the first is Ninigret Pond in Charlestown, Rhode Island, and tomorrow Caitlin Chafee will be talking much more about this project, but I'll give you kind of a brief glimpse to what you'll learn more about tomorrow. And then the second is Senjacontacket Pond, which is Oak Bluffs, Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. The Ninigret Pond project was a sediment placement project, meaning a thin layer of dredge material was placed on the eroded marsh area. The goals of the project were to restore both degraded marsh and helping to try to build some resiliency, anticipation of sea level rise. It had a concurrent social goal of being able to allow for dredging in that adjacent channel for recreational navigation. There are a whole slew of partners and stakeholders involved in this project. It was led by the Rhode Island Coastal Resources Management Council. That's our state coastal management agency. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the town of Charlestown, two of our really amazing nonprofits, Save the Bay and Salt Ponds Coalition, and then a set of other partners, EPA, the Narragansett Bay, National Estuarine Research Reserve, the Rhode Island Natural History Survey, and then local recreationists and aquaculturists. So a whole set of partners and stakeholders through kind of contributing to the implementation and monitoring. The second project is on Senjacontacket Pond in Oak Bluffs. This is a living shoreline project. So what you see here are core logs supplemented by those bags that are in the front. That's those are shell bags, kind of heavy weighted bags to keep those core logs in place. And this is like a semi-hardened structure to protect a heavily eroded area following Superstorm Sandy. The goals of the Living Shoreline Project were to prevent erosion, and then also kind of through a scientific lens, also to investigate if these provide kind of one tool for nitrogen mitigation. The adjacent pond is subject to a TMDL for nitrogen, and looking to see if this habitat also provides kind of microbial habitat for denitrification. And then finally, the final goal is to maintain and protect habitat for wildlife and birds that are valued by visitors and students. Similar to the other project, a whole slew of partners and stakeholders, EPA, the shellfish departments from Oak Bluffs and Edgartown, and then the Mass Audubon's Felix Nick Wildlife Sanctuary and the University of Rhode Island. And then other critical partners and stakeholders, Martha's Vineyard Shellfish Group and Friends of Sinjicatacat Pond. Those are both kind of local groups that were really able to rally a lot of folks. Audubon visitors and students, and then recreational and commercial shellfishers and recreational boaters. So these were that's kind of the human side of some of these projects. The other interesting detail about this project is this is the pond where Jaws was filmed, which is just a detail I like to include. So these are the two skeleton projects that we use to think about some of the social side of climate adaptation and coastal restoration projects. We use this to build something we call the SESAME framework, which is a very long acronym for Social Ecological Systems Framework for Collaborative, Adaptive Management, and Engagement in Coastal Restoration and Climate Adaptation. And it's a long acronym and it's full of buzzwords, but what we're really trying to capture is that when we're talking about ecological restoration and climate resilience, that we're really talking about both people and kind of the ecosystem, and thinking about that throughout the entirety of a management process. This framework that we developed adapts and expands upon Beerbaum et al.'s 2013 Climate Adaptation Framework. And so I'm going to talk you through the framework piece by piece. All the talks this morning and everyone who work in any form of coastal restoration and marsh projects kind of inherently have to do adaptive management because a lot of stuff goes wrong and a lot of stuff goes right, but our best laid plans often require flexibility and adaptation. And so there's a long history of adaptive management in coastal restoration projects. What's a little bit newer in consideration is thinking about these through a collaborative lens. Especially these bigger projects are very rarely implemented by a single organization. And so it really takes the partnership, the expertise, insights, and resources of a lot of different places in order to be able to pull off these big projects and to learn from them and build upon that work. So when we're looking at these two pictures, I flashed these pictures up earlier. You see, it not by accident, there's a lot of people in these pictures. And so these are people who, whose bodies needed to be on site to get the project on the ground. But what we don't see in the picture are all of the other people who weren't there that day. So maybe they weren't in the picture, or maybe they're behind the scenes providing a lot of other technical assistance or resources. And so these projects just really represent the partnership and collaboration of a ton of people to get this work in the ground. When we're talking about this collaborative adaptive management cycle, there's three different places that people often talk about in adaptive management, and I'm going to talk about kind of the people side of those three. The first is in the goals and planning stage, in thinking about these through this social ecological system, and understanding that both kind of coastal climate adaptation goals are centered on both the ecosystem and the people. And so that they can be concurrent goals or ideally even synergistic goals. Being able to develop the goals collaboratively across partners or even as appropriate with the public and other stakeholders. One example of this is from the Ninigret project, and that's a map on the left of the restoration project. So there were two specific ecological goals, were to restore the degraded marsh and also to try to build in resilience for the future. But there was also a second goal. The town of Charlestown wanted to be able to dredge this channel over here for use in recreational navigation. And so the project needed sediment, and the town wanted to get essentially rid of sediment from the bottom. And so we were really able, the project was really able to build upon the synergy of those two needs and to get support across more partners that way. The next stage after the goals and planning is implementing a restoration project. And here there's often a number of opportunities for contributing. There are some days where just a lot of bodies are needed to lift heavy stuff or to plant a lot of plants. And there's also opportunities for thinking about consensus building for best path forward and for revisiting goals and planning. Sometimes when we're implementing is when we realize what types of adaptations and adjustments need to be made. Here's one example. This is the core log installation for the vineyard. And this is just one of a couple different sites of the core log installation. All of those core logs needed to be moved and installed. Each of those stakes needed to be hammered in. And so this just represents even just physical resources, tons. And so there were opportunities for a lot of volunteers to contribute. The Audubon had a lot of partners, as well as the Shellfish Group on Martha's Vineyard. And so being able, there were just really good opportunities, and a lot of those volunteers then have an increased sense of ownership over the restoration site as well. The final piece of kind of touch point for stakeholder and partner engagement is in monitoring and evaluation. Monitoring and evaluation are sometimes a sore subject that they're often mandated, but not always funded all that well. But what they provide is just this invaluable opportunity to look within a project and see what we could be doing better, and then also to learn for future efforts. There's a push now for an increase at looking at not just ecological metrics, but social metrics as well. This is also from the Senjikataka project, and there they included both social and ecological metrics in their monitoring and evaluation plan. And so the kind of the same as like similar to what we heard earlier today, like elevation and water quality. Because one of the goals was for denitrification, they looked at enzyme activity for denitrification. And it also, the University of Rhode Island was a partner on this project, and they implemented a survey of users of the restoration site in the Audubon area to look at their attitudes and values of the site. And they found high levels of support for the restoration project. Because it was such an intensive social and ecological monitoring, it did lead to challenges for duration. It's hard to keep up that level of intensity for a long time, and also the responsibility of who would do that level of intensive monitoring. So this is what the whole framework for a project looks like together. We see kind of the iterative cycle of feedback loops and maybe having to restart sometimes, and the flexibility and adaptation. In addition to looking within a project, there's the value for learning from this project as we move forward to new projects. So lessons learned for additional projects. And one example of this is that the success and the findings from the Ninigrit project led to the Quanachitag project as well. Danielle Perry did really excellent work on this. You can read her paper, the Perry 2020 paper on this. And taking stock of what worked from the Ninigrit project and then really being able to build upon that success for future work. So this is our overall framework. A lot of this work has been done for a long time, but what we often do is keep the insights about what worked or didn't work within just kind of the institutional memory of the partners. In Rhode Island and in southeastern Massachusetts, we have just really, really great restoration practitioners and scientists. But the ideas and the knowledge lays with them. And so being able to capture some of those insights and share them and build it outwards is kind of a goal of some of this work. So in summary, humans affect every piece of a restoration or climate adaptation project. Stakeholder engagement and collaboration are critical. And thinking more carefully about the social side of restoration can benefit both an existing project as well as future projects. And this is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you.